Unknown facts about the French Revolution. Imagine a time, long, long ago, in a land of fancy castles and hungry people. The year is 1789, a time of big wigs, sparkling jewels, and a king who loved his cake a little too much. But beneath all the glitter, a storm was brewing, a secret history waiting to be told, secrets hidden deeper than the king's treasure vault. This isn't just a story from your history book. This is the real, wild, and sometimes very strange truth of the French Revolution, things they might not have told you in school. Picture Paris, not like the pretty city we know today, but a place buzzing with noise and smell. Narrow, dirty streets wound like snakes, filled with people. Most people were very, very poor. They wore ripped clothes, and their tummies rumbled from hunger. They watched the rich folks in their fancy carriages with eyes full of anger. These rich folks, they had too much food, too much land, too much power, and the common people had almost nothing. This huge gap between the rich and the poor was like a crack growing wider and wider in the ground, ready to swallow everything. Our story really begins with a whisper, a tiny secret passed from one person to another in the dark corners of the city. Everyone knows about the Bastille, the big scary prison that got stormed. But did you know a tiny group of brave women actually helped kickstart that whole explosion? They were called the Poissardes, which means fishwives. These weren't delicate ladies, they were tough, strong women who sold fish in the markets. They knew how to shout, how to fight, and how to get things done. It was October 1789. The people were starving. Bread was super expensive, a loaf costing almost a day's pay. Imagine not being able to feed your family. The king, Louis XVI, and his queen, Marie Antoinette, lived in luxury at the Palace of Versailles, far away from the hungry streets of Paris. They probably didn't even know what a hungry tummy felt like. This made the people very, very angry. One morning, a young woman named Louise, a fishwife with strong arms and a sharp tongue, stood at her market stall. Her basket was almost empty. No bread, not even a crumb for my little brother, she cried out. Her voice was loud and clear, ringing through the market. Other women, their faces tired and worried, nodded in agreement. They shared their frustrations. They shared their fear. Suddenly, a crazy idea sparked in Louise's mind. They live in luxury while we starve, she yelled. Let's go to Versailles. Let's tell the king ourselves. At first, people looked shocked. Go all the way to Versailles? That was a long walk, and very dangerous. But Louise was not afraid. She grabbed a drum. Boom, boom, boom. The sound echoed. More women joined her. They picked up sticks, kitchen knives, and anything they could find. Thousands of women, not just fishwives, but mothers, sisters, and grandmothers, started marching. Their numbers grew like a giant snowball rolling downhill. They walked for hours, their tired feet hitting the dusty road. Their angry voices rose into a roar. To Versailles, to the king. This wasn't just a march. It was a human wave, a powerful force of desperate people. They reached the grand gates of Versailles, a place of incredible beauty, built with shiny gold and marble. It looked like a dream, but inside, the king and queen were living a nightmare, cut off from their people. The women stormed the palace, pushing past the fancy guards. They wanted bread. They wanted answers. And they wanted the king to come back to Paris, to see their suffering with his own eyes. This event, often called the Women's March on Versailles, was a huge, huge deal. It showed the king that the people were serious. It forced him and the queen to leave their beautiful palace and come to Paris, almost like prisoners. They had to live in the Tuileries Palace, right in the heart of the city, where they could no longer ignore the hungry faces outside their windows. This was a secret power move by ordinary women that changed everything. Now, let's talk about the famous prison, the Bastille. Everyone knows it was stormed, right? But here's a secret. When the people finally broke in, expecting to find hundreds of prisoners crying for freedom, what did they find? Only 7 prisoners. Yes, just 7. 4 of them were forgers, people who faked important papers. 2 were lunatics, which just meant they had mental health issues back then. And 1 was a noble who had been locked up by his family because he was, well, a bit wild. It wasn't about freeing tons of people. It was about something much bigger, a symbol. The Bastille stood for the king's unfair power. It was a giant, scary reminder that the king could lock anyone up without a good reason. By tearing it down, piece by piece, the people were tearing down the king's power, too. They didn't just want to free prisoners. They wanted to free themselves from an unfair system. People took pieces of the Bastille home as souvenirs, like people take small rocks from a famous landmark today. Some even used the stones to build bridges, like the famous Pont de la Concorde in Paris. Imagine walking on a bridge made from the bricks of a fallen prison. It was a powerful message. the old ways were literally being used to build new roads for the future. Now, you know about the guillotine, right? The big, scary machine that chopped off heads. It's famous for being a symbol of the French Revolution. But here's a funny, dark secret. The man who invented it, Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotin, actually didn't want it to be a torture device. He wanted it to be a more humane way to execute people. Before the guillotine, executions were often long, painful, and messy. People were hanged, burned, or even pulled apart by horses. Dr. Guillotin thought his machine would make death quicker and less painful. He even suggested that his machine would make everyone equal in death. Rich or poor, noble or commoner, everyone would get the same fast, humane end. He thought it was a progressive, kind idea for its time. Can you believe it? He actually tried to make executions better. He probably didn't imagine it would become a symbol of terror. In fact, he was pretty sad about how his invention was used and how his name became famous for it. He didn't even want his family to have his last name anymore. But it was too late. Speaking of strange facts, did you know that during the Revolution, people tried to change everything, even time itself? They hated anything that reminded them of the old king and the church. So, they decided to get rid of the old calendar. No more Sunday, no more saints' days. They made a new calendar with 10-day week. Imagine going to school for 9 days straight before getting 1 day off. The months were renamed too, with fancy nature names like Vendemiaire for Harvest Month and Thermidor for Hot Month. They even tried to change the clock, making a day into 10 hours instead of 24, with each hour having 100 minutes. It was all super confusing. Everyone struggled to tell the time and date. This shows how radical and extreme the changes were during this period. They wanted to start everything fresh, from scratch, even the very way people measured their lives. But, as you can guess, it didn't last very long. People found it too hard to use, and eventually, the old calendar came back. Let's dive deeper into the king and queen. Louis XVI wasn't a mean king, not like a cartoon villain. He was actually quite shy and loved to fix clocks. He was a locksmith, a hobbyist who enjoyed working with his hands. It's a strange thought, the King of France, who ruled millions, spending his time tinkering with gears and springs. He was not prepared to be king and was very clumsy at making big decisions. He loved food, hunting, and his quiet hobbies more than ruling. This was part of the problem. He wasn't strong enough to lead a country in such a troubled time. And Marie Antoinette, the queen? Everyone knows the famous line, "Let them eat cake," when told the poor had no bread. But here's a little secret. She probably never said it. Historians say the line was probably made up by people who hated her, trying to make her look even worse. She was known for her extravagant fashion, her big, tall hairstyles, and her love for parties, but the cake quote was likely a piece of clever, mean gossip, spread like wildfire. She was also a foreigner, from Austria, and many French people didn't trust her. They called her Madame Deficit because she spent so much money. She had a little farm at Versailles where she pretended to be a milkmaid. Imagine the Queen of France, dressed in silk, playing farmer. It was her escape from the strict rules of court, but it made her seem even more out of touch with the real suffering of the people. This little farm, called the Hameau de la Reine, was like a fantasy world, far removed from the dirt and hunger of Paris. The royal family eventually tried to escape. This is a thrilling, movie-like part of the story. On a dark night in June 1791, the king, queen, and their children dressed up as ordinary people. The king even wore a wig. They sneaked out of the Tuileries Palace in a big, fancy carriage, hoping to reach the border and get help from other countries. They thought they were being very clever, but they made a big mistake. The king was recognized by a postmaster named Drouet in a small town called Varennes. How? Because his face was on the money. Imagine if your president's face was on all the coins and bills, and then they tried to sneak away disguised as an ordinary person. It would be impossible not to recognize them. This little detail, the king's face on the money, was a tiny, easily missed fact that brought down their whole escape plan. The family was arrested and dragged back to Paris, like criminals. This failed escape was a huge turning point. It showed the people that the king didn't care about France. He just wanted to save himself. It shattered any remaining trust people had in him. From that moment on, many people in France stopped wanting a king altogether. They started thinking about a republic, a country ruled by the people, not by a king. Then came the Reign of Terror, a very scary time. Everyone was afraid. If you said something bad about the revolution, or even if someone just thought you were against it, you could be arrested and sent to the guillotine. Thousands of people, rich and poor, were executed. It was a time of extreme paranoia, where neighbors suspected neighbors, and even friends turned on each other. A man named Maximilien Robespierre was the leader of this scary period. He believed that France needed to be purified of all enemies. He was a very powerful speaker and once a hero to the people, but he became more and more extreme. He thought he was doing what was right for the country, but his methods were brutal. He was always dressed very neatly, almost like a school teacher, but he was feared by everyone. Here's a less-known fact about the Reign of Terror. Some people called the victims martyrs of the guillotine. There were even special places, like the Picpus Cemetery, where many of the victims were buried in mass graves. Imagine a field filled with the bodies of those who died during this terrifying time. It's a silent, hidden testament to the horrors. The fear was so deep that people rarely talked about it openly for years afterward. But even Robespierre, the man who sent so many to the guillotine, met the same end. The revolution, like a hungry monster, eventually turned on its own children. People became tired of the endless executions. They realized that no one was safe. So, in July 1794, Robespierre himself was arrested and executed by the guillotine. The very machine he used to purify France became his own undoing. This was the moment the Reign of Terror finally ended, almost as quickly as it had begun. After all the chaos and bloodshed, France was exhausted. The people wanted peace. They wanted stability. This is where a very famous general steps onto the stage, Napoleon Bonaparte. He wasn't noble, he wasn't French by birth, he was from Corsica, an island that had only recently become French, but he was incredibly smart and a brilliant military leader. He rose through the ranks of the army like a rocket. Here's an interesting secret about Napoleon. While the revolution was all about getting rid of kings and queens, Napoleon eventually made himself an emperor. He crowned himself, not letting the Pope do it, showing everyone that he was in charge. It was a strange twist of fate, a king-like figure returning after all the effort to get rid of one. He brought order and created many lasting changes in France, like a new law system that is still used today. But he also brought back some of the old ways. For example, he brought back slavery in French colonies, which the revolution had actually abolished. This is a very dark, often forgotten fact about Napoleon's rule. It shows that even great leaders can make terrible mistakes and that progress is not always a straight line forward. The French Revolution was a roller coaster of emotions, full of big ideas, brave people, and terrible mistakes. It changed France forever and even changed the world. It showed that ordinary people, even hungry fishwives, could stand up to powerful kings. It showed that ideas like freedom and equality were worth fighting for, even dying for. But it also showed how easily things could spin out of control, how a good idea could turn into a nightmare of terror. From the women marching on Versailles to the few prisoners in the Bastille, from Dr. Guillotin's humane machine to the king's face on a coin, these little, often forgotten facts paint a richer, stranger picture of one of the most important events in history. It was a time when everything was turned upside down, a time of grand dreams and stark realities, a time that continues to whisper its secrets to us even today. And now, you know some of those secrets too.